Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this episode of the Playwright Spotlight. My name is James Eldon. My guest today is an actor, playwright, screenwriter, and upper school dean at the prestigious Harvard Westlake in North Hollywood, California. He's a mentor and member of the reading committee, as well as guest director for their Young Playwrights Festival. His most recent full-length play, Headwind, is currently being shopped around theaters for production across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Adam Hunter Howard. Adam, thanks for coming. Thanks for being in the Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you for having me.
So, we've worked together in the past as far as being on the reading committee for playwrights at Harvard Westlake. Mm-hmm. You've been doing it a lot longer than I have. Is there anything that you find is a recurring pitfall for playwrights, or just, I don't want to call them errors. They're just kind of habits that we all of us get into, and I'm sure you had them as well. What's one of the most common things that you see when it comes to playwriting and struggles?
I think structure is a big issue. I think a lot, particularly the kids who write for these young playwrights festivals, it might be their first real attempt at a script, and they've maybe taken some sort of quick master class that may have been required before they turn in their script or something like that. So they're kind of they're unsure about what makes a play. It might just be, I have an idea, here's some dialogue. So I often find that structure's in the way because they just don't really know the beats of the piece, or they don't know where the play is going. And secondly would be formatting. Formatting is hilarious as far as some of these that I read.
Let's start with structure for a second, because we're in the entertainment capital of the world. We're in Hollywood, and a lot of these kids, they come from, the industry, if you will, or their parents are. Do you find that some of that structure comes in the form of screenplay format? Not format, but structure, like where it's like maybe there's like 12 different locations.
Oh yeah. And in fact, that's a great point, because I feel like over the years, they've almost, within this festival, tried to encourage single location plays, because they're also trying to keep them short. They're trying to keep, with this being a festival, it's enough to kind of switch between eight to 10 writers, as opposed to 8 to 10 locations for each writer.
Right.
So single locations, I think, can be big for that. Because again, they might be thinking more of the picture of it all as opposed to the action of it, and realizing, wow, I can just as easily have this all take place on whether or not it's a single location, or even just saying, okay, let's simplify this. We can tell our story with boxes, black boxes in a black box. We don't need to dress the set or create a cinematic picture, because again, it's about the story of the play.
So going back to structure, and you're finding that's a little bit of an issue. How do you approach fixing that? Or what are some good points of structure, and how you can work with it and fine tune it?
Well, I think you want to know where your play's going. I mean, I think there's something to be said sometimes for the uncertainty of where your play goes, but I also think that might be more for people who have written before, trusting that they can find a way to resolve something, and also trusting that they're going to revise. When you're working with young playwrights, I think revision is terrifying to them. Much like asking them to revise an essay on The Great Gatsby. It's kind of like, here's my draft, here's my paper, I'm done. And so I think that can be, so for them to know where they're going, and then asking themselves with each of these, within each of these moments, what is the dramatic action? What's the action of this particular scene? What's the action of this particular play? It's about the overall play. I think sometimes the kids can get caught in exposition, and just some funny dialogue, which is certainly funny, certainly entertaining, but how is it serving the story? How is it serving the play?
Right. So piggybacking on that, because I know that you meet with the students like 3 times when you're mentoring them, usually within 3 times, it's usually with the idea. So do you recommend an outline? I mean, is that how you usually encourage them to approach the piece, or like what, how does that start off? Walk through the steps with me?
It depends on what they come in with. I mean, because you'll get some kids they hear the idea of a Young Playwrights Festival and they go, I want to write a play. All right, what's your play about? I don't know. Great. So let's just start with brainstorming. And so that can be the starting point, as opposed to a kid who goes, I've just got this idea where I pictured this scene, or I pictured this character. I decided I want to do something with that. Then it becomes about, okay, let's start to outline it. And I do think that outlining, particularly for these types of festivals that encourage short plays, can be really, really helpful, because you can write yourself into a corner. And oftentimes young playwrights, I think, try to fix structure or fix length by adding more length.
Fair enough.
I can write myself out of it.
No, I think we can all do that. Do you outline when you write?
I generally I do. And sometimes to a fault. Like I will, like my play Headwind, I had a general outline for it, kind of structurally, but the idea with that play also that I kind of knew how many scenes it was, and so it wasn't like I needed to really plan that too much. A play that I'm currently working on, which I'm actually quite frozen on, is I think because I've over outlined it, and now I'm so deep into an outline that I'm not fully comfortable with. I'm trapped and almost like, so there's that part of me that's kind of like, I need to get out of this. Should I start over? But then I'm kicking myself for all the work I've done already on the outline. So
let's talk about that. Let's talk about like where you start deleting. Are there things that you're finding that just, are you attached to something? Is that where it is? Or is it really just screw everything else up that you've already planned out?
Yeah, that can vary. As I've gotten older, I've actually become, funny enough, I would have expected myself to become more stingy about cutting, but I'm actually quite open to it. If someone suggests something to me and I can kind of see reason behind a cut, I'm all for it. In fact, with Headwind, for instance, there's this middle scene that takes place at a big dinner party that has like a lot of dialogue in it, and it was originally supposed to be, it was intended actually to be about a 45-minute real-time scene. And then, as it had revisions and as it had readings, the suggestion was that it needed to be trimmed. And I was actually surprised myself at how open I was to doing that. I didn't feel particularly attached to anything. And maybe that also told me that those things could go, that, the fact that I wasn't really holding on to it might have meant, something is not actually serving the play the way that it should have.
How did you determine that whether or not it was?
That's where basically I think outside help, that where readers that I trust are looking out for my best interest in terms of suggestions, because you can become so married to things you do. Well, not so much not married in the sense of like that I won't cut it, but that you just lose any objectivity to your work. And sometimes you're so deep in it that you're kind of like, well, this moment can't work without this. And someone goes, well, it does. And you're like, oh, actually.
Did you do this in a group setting where you just like kind of did like, hey, let's get everybody together. Let me hear this. Or did you just send it out to friends and say, hey, can you read this? Give me some feedback and go from there. And if you did both, I'm just kind of curious which one you found was more beneficial, or if one was more beneficial than the other.
Twofold. Particularly with Headwind, and kind of relates also to generally, I mean, I don't really worry about cutting until I finish a draft, and then I'm kind of like, then go back in. So with that, I had a completely bare first draft that I'd only seen. I invited some friends over that I trusted their opinions, and we did a reading of it, and then we talked about it, and then some of them sent me some notes, and then that moved on to successive drafts from there. One of the most valuable readings that happened of it, though, was when IAMA did the play for their new playwrights for their playwrights workshop for their New Works Festival a couple of years ago. I had a week, about 3 rehearsals with the actors and the director before we put it up on its feet, and we slashed that sucker like during rehearsals. And it was like, that's where I kind of almost became addicted to cutting. Like, I never thought I could see myself doing that, but it was like, I got suggestions from the director, who's also a dramaturg. Some of the actors were asking questions about, like, I just don't feel like I would say this here. And I was also thinking about, in terms of motivation, I was also thinking about time. I was thinking about length. And I just kind of found myself just trusting what people were saying, and also saying to myself, well, you know something? I mean, fine, I'll cut them for this reading. If they really mean something to me, I might put it back in. But the reality is, the suggestions I got were really, really good, and I didn't miss them.
Did you notice them? Or was the flow just so good that you're like, oh, wow, I totally forgot this was supposed to be at the same.
I forgot about them. Yeah, they really, I mean, they really could go.
So did they take your play knowing that I don't want to say that it was flawed, or knowing that it wasn't complete. Was it complete in your mind, but they still had some further suggestions? I'm kind of fascinated by this. It's like, we're going to take your play. We think it's that good. We're going to have you slash it down a little bit.
Well, no, because I think the point of the workshop with them, and a lot of the ones that I've submitted for outside of that, I mean, these are new works festivals. They're not stage productions. This is just, however many actors standing at microphones, if there are microphones, and just people listening to a reading. And the idea is that you're supposed to get feedback from this, that it's supposed to be they've picked the play because they like the idea, they see the potential in it, but they also know that it's an early draft. And so I don't think those festivals actually want to choose plays that are basically ready for production yet, because they ultimately want to say, oh, we like this play, we like this writer, we might want to one day work with him. And so let's work together and kind of massaging and developing this script together.
This is kind of a new concept to me. I'm completely new to this idea of workshop festivals, if you will. And it sounds like you've had a good experience. I mean, had you done this before? I mean, is this something you would recommend on any level, or?
Oh, I mean, I think any, yeah. I mean, I think the, there's some power names out there for that. Like the O'Neill Institute. The Ojai Festival.
Is that Ojai, California?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And these are places that get hundreds of scripts submitted for their particular new works festivals that, again, are not about production. It's about a week of rehearsal, readings that are attended by a public who then might have a talk back with the playwright. In fact, the Road Theater here in Studio City, North Hollywood, they do one every summer where they do 30 plays over 30 days.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that.
Same type of thing. And it's all about workshopping. And then maybe a relationship builds that it's about them saying, hey, we kind of discovered this, and maybe there's an opportunity to produce it. But big names, I mean, do these festivals. I mean, most of these festivals, like when you think of O'Neill and Ojai, I mean, like most contemporary playwrights that you can kind of think that are up and coming have had their plays workshopped in these types of places.
Well, because the Blank does their living room series as well. And have you participated in that, or no? The Blank Theater Company, Daniel Henning.
I know. I remember auditioning years ago for their Young Playwrights Festival.
Likewise, never got in.
But I don't know about the living room series.
It seems like it's the same concept. There's a gentleman, Stephen Kaplan, who did it's a really, really brilliant piece that involves the Bronte sisters and the little known brother.
Huh.
And it's historically fascinating, and it's just part of the family you don't know about. And the Blank did that. The actors had their scripts in their hand, and they walked around. It was loosely blocked, but I don't know if that's a year-long series. Mm-hmm. They do it every Monday, 52 weeks a year, if it's just like a certain amount of time, like maybe the summertime or something like that.
Yeah.
So
interesting. I mean, even, like the Geffen has the writer's room where they pick 8 or so playwrights to write a play over the course of the year that they basically workshop that lead to readings. The Center Theater Group has their, I don't think it's called the writer's room, but it's like a writer's group. Again, they pick playwrights that are somewhat established already, but you know, to get again, and then I've gone to a couple of their nights where they've had like at the Kirk Douglas Theater, you get to sit there and watch 4 brand new plays that are workshop readings.
Where did you find these opportunities? Are you just Google searching these? Are you DuckDuckGoing? Is there a website that lists all the workshop opportunities that might be out there?
I mean, so I knew of Ojai over the years. I knew of the O'Neill. As far as kind of digging into like, you know, like it's one like called like the Lost Frontier, which takes place in like I think it's called the Lost Frontier Theater Conference, takes place in Valdez, Alaska.
April talked about that. It's like every June, and she's gone like 2 or 3 times.
Right.
And she loves it. Yeah.
Like those are those are the ones that I didn't know about that I kind of had to be like, you know, to learn about. And that came from, I mean, Google searching, you know, theater conferences. You know, I'm a member of the Dramatists Guild, which has a great, you know, server to kind of like learn about opportunities that come up either for workshops or for contests or competitions. And then also just kind of asking playwright friends.
Let's since you touched base on it, let's talk about joining the guild. What was your process? How'd you go about it?
Well, to tell you the truth, joining the guild is not like SAG or AFTRA or Equity. It is it's easier than they are. Though actually I noticed. Though they seem to be getting easier these days too. But basically, if you have written a full-length play and you've had a reading of it, a reading that involved an audience or like a program, basically,
right,
you can become an associate member of the Dramatists Guild, which basically means you pay your fee, you get their magazine, but you also get access to all of their announcements, which is great. If you've had a production, then you become a full member, which basically means like, I think it's basically that you're just paying more money for the same perks.
It's a reasonable price. I think I'm
very much so.
I think I'm full, based on Bank and Trust, which was the one act that I wrote for Play Noir 2014, I think.
Yeah, then you're in.
Yeah, and
congratulations.
Like, here you go. So it's like, well, I'll submit and see maybe, and then like, hey, here you go, welcome. I'm like, look at that.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, for a group that is, pretty easily accessible, they do a good job. I mean, like they've got their website is well built. Their monthly magazine is excellent. They actually had, I don't remember what month it was, but they had a write a play in 30 days. Almost like you have like, the novel writing month. There's like write a play in a month, and did
they give you a prompt?
No, but they gave you all sorts of opportunities to kind of conference with other writers or get together to have just writing time on Zoom, where you'd be in the same breakout room, but just holding each other accountable for the 30 minutes that you're there to be writing. I just thought that kind of stuff is really cool, because it was just about, what I've always appreciated about the playwriting community and the theater community, as opposed to the film and TV community, is that I feel that they look out for each other more so than they do in those other disciplines. There's a little less of a rat race for success. It's more of a community of like, let's just make good stuff. Let's make art. Let's support each other, because the reality is playwriting is not, compared to the film industry, to make a career out of it, it's really, really hard, obviously. Sorry, it's hard for both. But as far,
I was going to say, I don't know.
I mean, as far as the amount of money you're going to make.
Sure.
I've just always found that, and that kind of started, I think, when I was kind of hanging around with some friends in Chicago, and I just kind of picked up on the way that they kind of interacted with each other. And I was like, you just don't see this in the TV and film industry.
What do you, because you mentioned success in playwriting, what do you think makes a playwright successful? Or what is success in playwriting? That's
a great question, because I think that where I've often gone awry with that, and that is just my own just sense of self, is validation, right? It's to write something that, someone's going to say, hey, Adam, really enjoyed your play. Wow, it's awesome. That's great. it's kind of like that feeling that we get, right? After a show when we walk outside after a great production. But I think as I've been writing more, to me, it's about the process. It's about finishing a story. It's about telling stories, and whether or not if people pick up on it, if they listen to it, if they see it, it's to create an opportunity for a story to be told. And that to me is success, is if you're able to kind of put that out there.
Let's talk about the process. What's yours? How do you, I don't want to get into the specifics of Headwind quite yet.
Okay.
Because there's other things that I want to delve into with that whole regard. But I do want to touch base on what the process is, if it's the same process for whatever the play is that you're doing, or is it very specifically tied to whatever this particular piece is that you're working on?
To me, it's by the project. Whether I start with an image, or I start with a character, or I start with a moment. Headwind kind of came, we're not getting into the specifics of that, but Headwind kind of came through themes.
Okay.
And a couple pictures I had in my mind. The play I'm working on now is just based on fascination with historical figures.
Is it called Hamilton?
It's not. It's called Burr.
Oh. No. Oh. and it revolves around milk.
Yes. No. It's the other story. No, this is about Fitzgerald and Hemingway. But the yeah, so it's so, and as I was saying before, it's like I'll either get mired in outline, or I'll just, the process for Headwind actually was because it was so structured for me. I did a lot of free writing. I just sat there and was like, this is the story I'm trying to tell within this particular scene. I'm just going to go. And particularly because I was writing about stuff that I was so intimately familiar with, it was, it really just kind of came out. In some cases, I mean, there's sections of that play that I wrote that have been untouched since the first time I put them in the play.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go here. Let's go here, because I read it and I'm fascinated by it. I mean, Adam, I really enjoyed your play.
Thanks.
So I hope that qualifies as success.
It's a mini win.
Thanks. That being said, how much of this is drawn from your life? I don't want to get too personal by any means, because as long as I've known you, it's pretty much only the names have changed.
Right. Well,
give or take.
Yeah.
Give or take. Obviously, without the loss, I felt
sure.
like,
oh, right.
And not to give anything away.
As far as that part of it. Yeah, it's based on real experiences with real people, sometimes exaggerated for, theatrical purposes.
Right. Sure.
And also, I guess, kind of, at times also imagined, but within the realm of possibility.
Right. You talked about the exaggeration of it, and there's certain questions I don't want to get into, because I don't want, anybody who might see this get into wow, is this really how he feels? Because I know that there's some personal drawings upon from your career and whatnot. And I certainly don't want to, draw a creative license or likeness rights for anybody who's like, I remember that day, So how much of that is this the same thing, or?
No, those are, as far as actually the literal discussions that happen in this play. And I guess for the listener viewer, we're talking about college counseling dialogues.
Right. I guess that's an important thing. Instead of playing vague book over here.
Those are not, I didn't really pull real things that were said. There were some things I've heard about, and there were also, but the people are they're either they're either a combination of multiple people brought into one, or they actually are people that I have come across.
And I guess that's why where I was hesitant to approach it or bring it up, because, there's that, is this the attitude that you really feel about these people, So that's where I was a little concerned about, going there.
Yeah, no, I'm fine going there. I mean, it's a play about privilege, and it's a play about blatant privilege, and a play about assumed privilege, or privilege that you deny.
Sure.
And it exists. I mean, I don't think that it's particularly when you're talking about independent, highly selective private schools and such, and then also the bridging to highly selective universities in this country. There is a great deal of privilege that is played, and that's part of this.
Is it privilege or entitlement?
Well, maybe a little bit of both.
I guess they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I mean, it's, that's the, part of also what is, that the play, I think, try and gets at is that, these kids are who they are, not necessarily because they're bad kids. It's also just because of what they've grown up in, what they've been surrounded with, which they had no choice about.
Right.
And so there's kind of a frustration, or at times even disgust with, just, the fact that these students, at least in this play, are led to behave in certain ways and have certain expectations, and just really don't have a sense of life outside their bubble.
Right. Sure. So unpacking that, how do you approach writing from real life, or drawing from real life and applying that to your play? I mean, is it taking bits of conversation and expanding upon them? Is it taking different characters and, like, this person's here and this, what would happen by putting them in this situation? How do you approach that? Yeah,
well, with this play, it's interesting. I mean, it's like when you write from real life, it can be terrifying, but it can also be easier, right? I mean, as I said, like, a lot of this was coming from just like, it just flowed out because it was there. I'd been taking notes on really interesting things that happen kind of in my job and such over the years, that I was like, one day this is going to make for a really interesting play. So I also had kind of those moments to call upon. I also knew that with this play, I wanted to have a small cast playing double parts. And so I knew that I wanted to have, like, this central adult scene, but then I wanted those adults to also, if necessary, also play the kids. So there was kind of a purposeful double casting.
The juxtaposition of, like, this person being this person, then later on.
Right.
And so that's intentional. Like, this person is supposed to be this person for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, I think so.
In a way.
Yeah. There actually were a couple jokes in the play that got cut that were kind of winking at the audience about the double casting a couple times, but ultimately I let those go because I kind of felt like I even changed the cast of characters. I think suggesting the double casting is not requiring the double casting, because I know that most companies do want to have a smaller ensemble. But
would you be opposed if it was just cast straight out? Like,
no. In fact, it's more work for people. But it was, but it was, at least when I started writing, it kind of helped to guide structure, actually, as far as, like, who was available when, and such, and then which of this ensemble of actors would be present and where.
You have an effect in this piece that revolves water. How much do you think? Can we talk about it? Can you describe what this effect is, if you don't mind? Well, and I want to unravel that whole thing as well.
Yeah, I mean it's obviously it's thematic, and it's supposed to be it's supposed to be a metaphor. I mean, when I wrote it, and if I had a Las Vegas Cirque du Soleil size budget, I would love real water in this play. It's supposed to have real water. I also am aware though.
So talk about that. Talk about like I guess with that. I don't know if it gives anything away. So if you don't, so talk about like kind of how that builds and how it starts off and then what it becomes by the end. And then I have a question that I want to ask.
Yeah. So just kind of periodically through the play, there's a reference to the fact that it's continuously raining in Los Angeles, which is actually rare, which is purposeful.
Sure.
That there is a slow leak that has been building in this guy's office. And then over the course of the play, as things begin to unravel for him, the dripping gets worse and continues until it becomes literally an all-out flood that then floods the stage to the point where he finds himself in a boat, basically in the water, kind of coming to final terms with himself and the circumstances.
It's a fascinating moment, and it's very dramatic. And so I know that you give a suggestion about how it could be approached. Is that purposeful? Did you say, look, this is what I would prefer, but here's a way you can approach it?
Right. I mean, if I had my druthers, as I said, I want I was thinking of oh gosh, what's it called? Mary Zimmerman's Metamorphosis, like where it's like people soaking on stage just looks, I love that when they're really dealing with water.
Which Harvard Westlake did.
Yes, they did. They did. I mean, I even saw like Grapes of Wrath. Like it's like it's raining from the ceiling. It's like I was like this is all stuff that's doable, but of course
costs money.
That it costs a lot of money. So it's like okay, places like the Geffen and a Taper, they can handle this, but they're not doing my play. And so it's like
yet.
But the idea being it was kind of like okay, so that would be the ideal. So then I thought to myself, and I will admit I've seen some amazing strides in the use of projection in theater, from the big houses to the small ones that have been insanely good. I think the first time I saw it was when I saw Peter Hall's production of As You Like It at the Amundsen, and they projected the entire Forest of Arden, and you were lost in it. I mean, it looked like you were in a forest, but it was all projection. And I was like, okay, so this is where we're at now. And I was like, you can certainly flood a stage with smoke and projection and sound and still have flood the stage, but still
Sure.
make it have the same effect that it's supposed to have.
Do you think that helps or hinders?
I don't know, because I haven't seen it either way.
What I mean by that, let me be more specific. Do you think that helps or hinders your chance of being produced?
By saying I want real water?
By having such a specific effect, whether it's legit or whether it's even projected or whatever producer may come up with a substitute to.
No, it's a great question, because I've often thought to myself, if I just get rid of all that stuff, then do I still have a good play? And I was and talking to people who are familiar and read the play multiple times, they all hold on to this water, whether it's digitized or real, as being instrumental to it.
I would completely agree. I mean, it is. It's such a huge, fascinating moment, for lack of a better word. So it's, yeah. I'm curious, because we talk about like things that can hold back production of a piece. Whether that's multiple locations, or not even multiple, like too many locations, or something that just is going to cost a lot of money, at least for beginning playwrights. I mean, if you're established, I guess you kind of get that leeway, but so I'm just kind of want to bring it up in that regard. Yeah,
I mean, and then just because I mean, just the title too. I mean, it's like with the headwind. I mean, the idea of like it's a sailing term. It's on the water. As you know from the play, there's a significant reference to all of that. That I just feel like it's a wet play.
Sure. So let's talk about the concept. Like, this is a full length that you wrote And where did the idea come from? And what made you like, now I've got to sit down and write. I have to write this. This is the play that I have to write right now.
It's interesting because I didn't sit down to write the play that came out. I sat down to write a play about privilege as I saw it within the college counseling process. And I also wanted to write a play about someone who is, as a parent, struggling with a son who has autism. And the more I thought about each of those and the struggle, they kind of began to intersect with each other. That I was like, what's the frustration and the struggle that Andrew, who is the protagonist of the play, has within his job that is holding him. Because, and this goes back to my earlier questions too, as far as like writing from truth. I mean, the reality is a lot of this play is about me too, as far as my own feelings. Sure.
Right. And that's kind of what
I have an autistic son. Right. And so there was a little bit of like dealing with the job piece, but then at the same time saying like, what is it that is enough to, what's enough to forgive somebody, or for someone to forgive themselves from, I'm not describing this very well. I wanted high stakes for him.
I think that's an important thing to have in a play.
And it was one of those things where I felt like, what does it mean? So we're dealing basically with the intersection of privilege and loss. And what happens when those two come together? Because privilege is so often just kind of set aside as saying, okay, you're privileged, you are this. But what happens if that privilege also comes with some element of loss, and how we view that loss, or how a person views their own loss within that privilege?
Does that become an excuse?
Well, that's I don't think it's an excuse. I think hopefully it makes it more complex, because we're talking about someone who is at their wit's end with their professional life.
And I guess that question that I was asking was more as like, I guess from the outside, whereas it's like, it's not really an excuse. It becomes a realization. Is that right? For that character, is that what Andrew comes to realize, is that he does have it, or he doesn't?
Does have what?
Privilege.
Oh yeah. No, I think the thing is and even one of the characters calls him on this. I mean, one of the kids calls him on this. He's no different than them. He's just an older version of them. He comes from their story too. He's just lived longer, and then he's moved into a phase of his life where he has then been affected because of, his son, and how that has then changed him. So I mean, there's an element of him being quite a hypocrite, as far as what he's calling these kids out on, but at the same time, I think trying hard not to be that, or not admit that to himself. Right.
Right. So we've gone through the themes of the play. So where did you start?
I started writing the first scene. So even before you have the introduction of like because the opening image is a silhouette of a storm and someone in a boat. But I started writing the opening scene with Andrew and why am I blanking on his name? And one of his students. Just going at it as far as a counseling meeting, and I was like, I'm in 60 of these a year. But I also felt like, okay, what does Andrew want from the student? What does the student want from Andrew? Right? And it's kind of one of those. It's also kind of showcasing what these things can be like, because it's so often so hard to change the mind of someone that's so set on what they want. you know, particularly when you're talking about this world of entitled, you know, college applications and stuff. You know, it's kids not apologizing for their way in, and at the same time, it's not feeling that they're just not getting the fact that there is not getting their privilege, or not getting that it is, you know, that it's a larger world than, again, it goes back to this bubble.
So once you got your first scene down, I mean, was this one that was, you mentioned that you just kind of went straight through with this one. So there was no outline. This is just like, this is where it's going. And this is, I've got it now. I can see it. All right.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, I started playing, I think there was revising as far as how far I wanted, you know, the student to be kind of pushing Andrew's buttons, or like, you know, how do kids talk to adults, but, you know, and there's a little bit of imagination in that, you know, because, you know, if I were actually Andrew and a kid spoke to me that way, I would probably kick them out of my office, you know, and say, come back when you've got a, you know, a better attitude. But I think Andrew lets the kids stick around because, you know, Andrew's dealing with his own grief, which is, you know, kind of loading the whole thing anyways. And then he's kind of one of them, just, you know, years removed.
Do you think that it's an outlet, or if it's just like piling on them? I'm trying to think of the right phrase to kind of like, why doesn't he kick them out? What is it that really,
because I think he gets a thrill out of putting them in their place. And, you know, this is the opportunity, because you've got these students that think that they've figured out their way to get into Stanford, their way to get into Columbia. And as he says to them, it's kind of like, I could have told you weren't getting to Stanford in 9th grade. You know, now you're a senior. It's like, it's not happening now. It wasn't happening then. And there's something that I think that he does get joy from, telling a privileged kid, sorry, Ben, you know, everything else has been given to you. You can't have this one.
Right. What is the most important element to playwriting in your mind?
Conflict. I mean, that's
internal or external.
Just conflict on stage. So, you know, however that plays out. But I mean, to me, a scene can't exist, right, without someone wanting something from somebody else. You know, whatever that, you know, conflict is, and whatever the obstacle is to get over. If someone's alone on stage, they might be dealing with their own internal conflict. But I feel that, I mean, that's been really helpful for me writing, is to kind of just always hold myself to that. Like, does this scene have an action to it? Does it have a dramatic action to it? Does it have a conflict to it? Because if it doesn't have that, it either doesn't need to be there, or it needs to be revised.
Are those mutually exclusive? Dramatic action and conflict?
No, I don't think so. Because I mean, I guess it looks at, how we look at dramatic action, because one can look at the dramatic action of being an overall arc of someone for a play. But I think you could then say so if you're saying that conflict is kind of, you know, within the life of a scene. You know, multiple conflicts that can contribute to a dramatic action. But I just think, you know, scenes just need to have action to them.
Give me your definition of action. What is action to you?
Action is to start start in one place, and then after the process of to start one place, and by the end of a beat, have either changed your tactic to accomplish that task, or you have accomplished what you wanted and therefore move on to a new beat, or you have not earned what you wanted and then either you try again or you move on to another need or desire.
How do you do that?
What do you mean?
Is there an answer to that?
Oh, write and revise and revise. I mean, it all comes down. I mean, again, action actor. It all comes from the same root, right? I mean, it's about activity. It's about It's about moving towards something, right? So it's seeking a goal. That doesn't. I mean, it doesn't have to be like some huge leads, like huge task. It's not like every scene needs to be about like trying to, to get the cereal away from the kid. I mean, it's it can be trying to get somebody to look at you differently than they were 2 moments ago. But you're playing something that is trying to convince them to change that.
You've got multiple characters, especially in the dinner scene or in any scene that you may write. How do you approach conflict within a group? Does everybody have conflict with somebody in that, or how does that work? How do you approach that?
Great question, and that to me right now is the biggest hole in the play that I'm still working on, because I think you put that whole dinner party together. I still think there are a couple characters in that scene that they serve Andrew's purpose, but they don't serve their own purposes. There's a couple characters where I kind of feel like I can't really define what Camille wants. I can't really define yet what Jeremiah wants, though Jeremiah certainly serves the conflict that Andrew's traveling through, and Camille certainly serves, whether as an ally or a contradiction as far as like some of the arguments as well. But it's all serving his through line in some cases, and I think that's where I can sometimes. It gets tricky when you got these big scenes, because everyone needs to have some sort of reason for being there, or they need to have some sort of action for their own character.
Well, you're also looking at relationships in this regard. You're dealing with couples one way or another. And couldn't it just be my want is to look out for my partner? Is that not enough, or do they really need to have something bigger?
Well, my want to be looked out for my partner, but then what about my partners? What does he or she want? I mean, I think that's where, I think that, Andrew has a purpose in the scene. His wife has a purpose in the scene. His best friend has a purpose in the scene. But there's a couple kind of like plus ones.
Right, and that's why I say is their purpose to look out for their main partner, the partner who's really kind of focused on the scene. Because you've got a couple characters that call Andrew out,
right,
where their partners may not say anything, but is it enough to have them interject in their defense? Is that enough conflict to give them purpose? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean that gets tricky, because in one sense it's like, if you throw this script in front of like 6 really talented actors, they can probably find, what their action and motivation and experience of that whole scene is, and make it seem like it's all supposed to be the way that it is. But at the same time, me as the writer, I look at that kind of saying, okay, I'm looking at this now without the ability for someone else to kind of tweak it just in performance. And I do feel like there are, I just feel like there's a couple characters I'm still potentially doing a disservice to that could have more value and life to the scene. And
does that come with the price of length, like making it longer and potentially,
or telling Andrew to shut up, because Andrew talks a lot in that scene, and even gets called out at the end for like, going on and on. I mean, maybe that's where the compromises happen, as far as how length plays in. I hate length. I hate the fact that length matters. I get it. We're in a world now, I think, where people want
an hour
to 90 minutes with no intermission. Which generally I can get on board with that. Sure. At the same time, I've been to some plays where I'm kind of like, intermission actually feels really kind of cool, because I can take a breath, but then I can't wait to go back in. So it's tough with that. But back to the question though, it's like a lot of this is just, this is also me being perhaps a perfectionist, or just kind of seeing things that like maybe no one else sees.
On that note though, how many things did your actors find or ask you about that you're like, I didn't even notice that. Like that seem intentional, because sometimes I think we write and then all of a sudden there's a layer there that was just, I'm just writing. But actors have a tendency to pick up on certain things. Did you have that experience? Did anybody come to you and like, hey, so this, and this, I noticed that, does this symbolize this? And you're like, yeah, absolutely.
Gosh, I can't remember specifics on that. I mean, I yes and no. I mean, I was because I'm also a former English teacher. And so I've spent years close reading literature. And so there was a part of me that also, when I wrote this, was very much aware of the layers, was very much aware of the symbolism, was very much aware of the callbacks, and almost writing as if the way that I would break down a play written by, a published professional, that I'd be like, oh, look, this came back here and all that, kind of close reading it. And it's like, so I almost wrote this with that in mind, that I was like, what if someone were to close read this play? What would they pick up as far as that journey goes? Something oftentimes also, it's because it's amazing, because you can close read a play and you'll only see it if you close read it. You'll only see it if you spend time sitting there with the play and just like reading it line by line and kind of, unpacking it. Whereas if you see it on stage, our brains don't have time to close read what we're watching. We're usually just very present with what is on stage and what is happening. And then it's later that we might think about, oh, that whole thing with the thing, blah, blah, blah.
Right. I found that, and maybe there's tons of plays out there, and maybe I'm just ignorant, just under-intelligent for like Tom Stoppard. You take Arcadia. I performed in that in college. I went back and read it, and I'm like, oh my God. Like it's so layered that I'm like, there's no way that all this stuff is being picked up on. I don't know. That's just me in that regard.
But what's interesting about that though is, like, for instance, there's someone who might have, I'm trying to remember, because Arcadia is based on, I know, like some like real historical figures.
Lord Byron.
Right, Byron and that whole crew.
Yeah.
And so it's like, to me, what makes a great play or great piece of art is that, so if you go into that play and you're familiar with Byron and you're familiar with all his contemporaries, and you're picking up on that while you're watching the play, it kind of adds this great level to your experience. But that play should also speak to somebody that knows nothing about Lord Byron, right? And
it speaks to chaos theory as well, which
right.
To me, in my opinion, very few know about it. So it's very specific in that regard as well. But so, what do you suggest? What do you suggest for playwrights that don't have that background that you've got, that aren't so immersed in English and literature? Do you have an advice on how to approach their work with the same I don't know if that's the right word. Precision, layers.
I mean, don't try to be who you're not. I mean, and that's, what draws me to the theater, what draws me to plays that I want to write about, is not going to be the same thing that draws you to what you want to write about, or draws anybody. It's the story you want to tell. It's what you find interesting. And there's, Edward Albee, the zoo story, it's two guys in a park, and it's genius, right? There's levels of emotion to that play, but there's no highbrow layers of sorry you didn't go to grad school for this to understand this play. It's just it's two men meet in a park. Oh my God, what happens? Do
you think it's that straightforward, that there's no symbolism or any underlying aspects that themes?
Well, there might be, but I'll tell you, if there are, Albee's not, well, you wouldn't talk about it. I think he's dead now, right?
Yeah.
People have been trying to break down Harold Pinter's plays for years, and he would always say, why are you putting so much effort into this? I just put stories on stage. I mean, it's like, you know, and whether or not they admit, you know, they admit to it or not. I mean, I mean, this is all kind of part of like the close reading discussion anyways, where like this happens in high school all the time, where like kids are kind of like, why are we spending all this time trying to like break down, you know, what Emily Bronte meant with Jane Eyre in this particular moment in like, you know, with like the red curtains and such, right? You know, it's kind of like, well, we're going to, you know, unpack this language here. And they're like, well, she didn't mean to do that. And it's like, well, maybe she did, and maybe she didn't. Let's assume that she did. But even if she didn't, it's still something that we're exploring and kind of bringing life to a piece together. And therefore it has value to it.
Right.
And we're kind of still, at the end of the day, drawing from the human experience.
And that's probably the most important part, as it is.
That's all that, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's even, I think, why that's what I've, you know, that's what I found also is when I've also been, you know, cause I love reading plays too. I read, that's like kind of my favorite stuff to read these days. And it's like all of the great plays now, whether they're contemporary, modern, classic, they're about the human experience, and whether they are coming from me trying to put some sort of symbolism and levels and bringing water onto stage to deal with privilege and grief, or it is someone who just wants to honestly put two black boxes on a stage and say that they are having a scene in, you know, Grand Central Station. We're still telling a story about human experience, regardless of, you know, where we come from as far as how we create that piece of art.
What makes a good play in your mind?
Oh, wow. Great characters. I always know it goes, I'm trying to go back to like, you know, Aristotle's Poetics. But character, language, theatricality. I think it's really important to ask ourselves, why is this a play? Why isn't this a movie?
Right, fair enough. What makes great character? Since you said it, great character.
Complexity and conflict. Again, conflict can either be external or internal. And I think complexity in terms of, kind of related to conflict. It's great characters are those who are, I feel, coexisting with conflicting emotions or traits.
I don't want to go on the assumption that everybody that watches or listens to this knows what these terms are, what they mean. Can we talk about that? Can we talk about internal and external conflict and their definitions, or what they mean in the playwriting world?
Sure, I'll do my best.
Yeah. So internal conflict.
I mean, it's the struggle within. I mean, it's the dealing with grief at the same time as dealing with privilege. I mean, they don't necessarily have to be, you know, exact opposites of each other. You know, but that there can be multiple things within that are kind of tugging with each other.
Do you think that internal conflict has to be blatant? And what I mean by that, it has to be stated or displayed, or do you think that it's...
Oh, good plays show it. I think any good piece of art or literature shows it. I mean, that's all about showing versus telling. I mean,
talk about that.
It's much more interesting for us to watch somebody experience something and kind of gather what is going on with them, as opposed to someone standing out there and kind of being like, you know, I feel this way. I am this.
Sure.
You know, that's why Shakespeare's soliloquies are so brilliant, right? We're watching someone take an internal journey through all these lines as they try to either figure out an action that they have to perform, or if they're figuring out how they're feeling in a given moment and what to do.
Is it always subtextual? Good internal conflict?
Probably. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that connects to whether it is literal or whether it's, you know, whether it's told versus shown. yeah. So I mean, I would think generally it's like that's just we are so that's the thing, is like we are so wonderfully complex as people, which is why I also find that like young writers, studying people is one of the great things you can do to create characters. You know, is just sit on a park bench or just sit at the coffee shop and take notes on people that you're seeing. And it can be, you know, it can be physical, but it can also be what you're picking up from someone's emotion. Like you just see someone standing in line at Starbucks and you can just look in their eyes, look at their posture and wonder like, what's going on with them? Like, where'd this guy just come from? Like he did, you know, why is he twitching? Or why he just looks a little off. Like, did someone just break up with him? You know, that type of stuff is great. When I was at Texas for grad school, it was great. We would we'd sit in the movement studio and we'd look out this window that looked out over one of the many quads at UT Austin. And, we would just watch people walk and see what they were leading with. You know, were they leading with their pelvis? Were they leading with their chest? Were they leading with their forehead? Were they leading with their knees? And like, just the way that people walk and their gait. And what does someone's gait tell you about somebody or make you think about somebody? And then suddenly you're asking great questions about character.
So physical character versus, I don't want to say it's not internal character.
Emotional, like the emotional life of a character?
Sure.
Again, that's either from, you know, and that's going to showcase itself over the course of the play by one's actions, usually external in terms of how they connect or don't connect with other characters in terms of what their actions are and how those go.
And that's the external conflict
Yeah. I mean, that's typically what we're used to in most theater these days is seeing external conflict happen unless someone's breaking a fourth wall.
You mentioned theatricality as something that makes a good play as well. So what's a good example of theatricality in that regard?
Dumping a bunch of water on stage.
Fair enough.
A helicopter, you know, Miss Saigon.
Is that theatricality? Is that just dramatic effect?
Yeah, no, I mean, it all goes back to, that's Aristotle with spectacle, right? You know, some people would ask, like, you know, is the Super Bowl a theatrical event? I mean, it's like in ways it might even be, right? I mean, it's improvised sport, but it's like, but theatrical to me is just kind of like something that, and it's going to vary by how you look at it, but I mean, it's something that kind of makes it's a musical, right? Like a musical is a theatrical event because it's like someone needs to stop and sing about their building emotions. The only way they can get out how they are experiencing this moment is to jump into song. Now, crappy musicals are just like, oh, we've been talking for a while, let's now just switch to song. And like when you've got like, you know, good musicals that actually further the plot and kind of like earn the song, that's a truly like true theatricalism.
I so want to put you on the spot right now and give me one example of a great musical and one example of a crappy musical.
Assassins is a great musical. I'm biased. I was in a production of it, but you know, Stephen Sondheim, who doesn't want to watch a musical about people who tried to kill presidents? And a crummy musical would be Cats, because they've got no reason to be singing these songs. They're just there and they want to sing about it.
But aren't they displaying their emotional struggles in those songs?
No, they're quoting
T.S. Eliot?
T.S. Eliot, poor Thomas Stearns. So, I mean, yeah, but I think as far as plays go, I mean, it's like, because here's the thing though, it's like one would say, go back to the Zeus story. It's like, what's theatrical about the Zeus story? And as far as like the theatricality of it, and it's really actually kind of tough to really pinpoint what it is, and the Zeus story could work as a film. Zeus story could work as a play. There's actually nothing about that play that says that this needs to be on a stage. I'm drawn though to the plays that are that way. I want to see a house that's collapsing on stage but again, they could also say, well, that could be in a movie too. I mean, that's kind of where you begin to it gets kind of like, you know, nuanced as far as like where it fits. But a play does need to have some sort of, you know, and talking to the audience, breaking the fourth wall, that's theatrical. So yeah, I'm really into magical realism. I've always been into magical realism. I've always just loved the idea of just something that is just a little outside of our reality.
Example.
It just kind of like, why I've been drawn to like, Peter Pan, it's and speaking of theatricalism, it's like, just, throw Peter Pan on some strings and fly her over the stage. But then take, for instance, Tony Kushner's Angels in America. You've got an angel busting through the ceiling, and it actually even says in the original script, I want you to see the strings. Like, you're supposed to know that you're in a theater watching this play. Whereas if you watch the HBO special, it's created in a beautiful way, because it's a beautiful adaptation of it. But that is an angel that is supposedly actually, busted through the ceiling and is truly flying, but not one on strings.
I'm just curious, though, why you'd want that. I mean, people are going to suspend disbelief anyways, and they're probably going to, even if you can see the strings, why would you want somebody pulled out of that moment?
Because I think in his case, what he's doing is he's purposely going, he's calling upon Brecht. And Brecht was one of those theater makers who was like, he wanted you to be aware that you were in the theater watching a play because of, in ways, the politics of it. And at least at his time, it was very political. In this case, those who kind of do those Brechtian productions are suggesting that there is a purpose to why you're here that is not just about your comfort of being lost in the play. They want you to be aware that you're watching something that is affecting you, and therefore you are almost kind of part of it because you haven't lost yourself to it.
What's your favorite play?
Oh, darn. Don't ask me that question. What is my favorite play?
Or what inspires you? How about that?
That's even harder
to write.
What inspires me to write? What inspires me to write are bold stories. I mean, I get inspired when I watch other people tell great stories. When I go to the theater, I'm never more inspired than to go back and do some of my own stuff. When I go see something, and it's particularly when I see something that is like something I would never think of, or just something, that is just kind of so unique to that person's vision, or their artistry, that I'm kind of like, you are just so true to you. Excuse me. And that makes me want to go and kind of find my uniqueness, I guess. I think as far as play, actually, to be honest, I think as far as plays, I do think that, I think Angels in America, particularly Millennium Approaches, is one of the plays I always go back to. I teach a class on American playwrights at school, that I use Angels in America as kind of the bookend to the show, to the course, where I kind of feel like it's a
three-parter, right? Two.
Millennium Approaches and then Perestroika.
Wait, what's the first one?
Millennium Approaches.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I forgot. Yeah.
So it's just a great way kind of into contemporary drama and marginalized theater, and just great way into kind of just storytelling and beats and action and arc. That then what's great is then we do Millennium Approaches, and then we kind of read a handful of other plays, and then if we have time, we then go back to Perestroika to kind of bookend the whole thing.
Are there any plays that you use as examples of like not what to do?
Of not what to do? Wow, that's a really good question. Man, I honestly can't. I think I'm too careful about reading good, inspiring stuff, before I even.
Have you ever read anything that's just like, oh my God, this is terrible?
Yeah, but I have. I get teased a lot by some friends of mine and ours actually for just liking things too much. I tend to maybe call me an optimist, but I always try to find something in something that I see, even if it's like, I mean, maybe Mamma Mia, I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. And that thing started.
Which one, the first or the second?
No, I mean the theater, like
Sure.
that was like, why? I try to find something in everything I see and read that I find not that doesn't redeem the whole thing, but I feel like it was worth my time being there and seeing it to take that away from it. And I also feel that we owe it to I don't like leaving places early, even if I'm seeing a production that I'm really, really disappointed in. I just feel like leaving is just one of the greatest disservices you can do to the people who have put their time into something. Leaving early, rather.
Well, yeah. Well, we have a mutual friend who doesn't hesitate to leave early or to heavily sigh. What advice do you have for beginning playwrights?
Practice. I do think that it's very easy to get caught up in an idea and a vision that if you don't do the little things kind of to get there can kind of freeze you.
What little things?
I mean, just in terms of like, playwrights should not be just writing one acts or just writing full-length plays. They should be writing scenes. They should be writing 10-minute plays. They should be writing 5-minute plays. They should just be writing, because the more you do it, the better you become. And whether or not that is something that is said to you by other people in terms of like the feedback that you get, you are just going to become better by doing it. And it's probably it's just like playing tennis, right? You're gonna develop your strokes better just the more forehands you take. And I think rejection's a big part of the game. Just know that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So getting your work out there, it's incredibly it's an incredibly vulnerable trade for any type of writing, screenwriters too. And you're putting a lot out there when you submit your work for people to judge it, and building kind of a type of armor, to get criticism is important, because you're not going to make it unless you can take that. And I also think, just as far as, I've always loved this quote from Beckett that is, try again, fail better, which is, some might say is kind of pessimistic, but it to me is about embracing process and embracing the fact that, we will never get there. Because if you get there and you've figured it all out for yourself, why do you keep doing it? If we have all the answers, there's no point to the process. There's no point to the work.
So then, and this is a question that I think has come up in almost every episode. How do you deal with rejection?
Whiskey. No. It stings. I will say. I mean, it's going back to what I was talking about, just as far as like validation, right? You're kind of like, oh, ouch. But it's kind of like you just have to. I think one has to remind themselves that rejection is usually not about you. It's about the project. It's about the piece. Like, if you do the work, if you put in the time, if you have the talent, I mean, you do have to have talent. It's so often going to be more about it's not so much about your work, but about what the festival is looking for. Or, trying to balance out voices, or to, just kind of encourage you to go back to working. I mean, it's ultimately though, I mean, rejection is like, the entire industry of the arts.
Yeah.
does not exist without rejection.
Ain't that the truth?
And if you're not prepared for that, you shouldn't be doing it.
Can people find your work yet? Is it out there for?
Nothing is really, no, nothing's published yet. Sorry. No, I mean, I'm certainly, it's, as far as Headwind goes, it is still, it's looking for a home. I'm still, seeing kind of where that goes. The pandemic kind of slowed some progress down on it, which was really unfortunate.
Sure.
But no, nothing is actually, actually, technically speaking, if you go on, and this is actually a great resource and site for people, is the New Play Exchange.
Sure. Yeah. I've heard of it. I have yet to, which I should be. I'm embarrassed and ashamed that I have not been on this yet.
Headwind is on that. And it's basically, so what's great about the New Play Exchange is like you pay a very nominal fee. You pay like somewhere between like $10 and $15 to have for like the year to have your plays on this database that someone could use your play to pull scenes from, that they can use your play to potentially that they could pull from that maybe they want to do it. There's sometimes they'll have announcements for workshops or for productions, and you can submit your play through it. It's but most, even like like Jeremy O'Harris, who wrote Slave Play and is one of the hottest playwrights out there. His stuff is on there, so it's like it's readily available too. I mean, people's work is on there. But it's just a great place to kind of, if someone wants to go in there and just read plays, thousands of them are there. And it's and this is the Headwind's on there. It's the only play I have on there right now.
Nice. All right. Great. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and leave a comment or question below. If you're listening to the audio version on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to like and subscribe and leave a review. If you have any questions or suggestions of playwrights you'd like to have interviewed on future episodes, or if there are questions you'd like addressed, please let us know. On that note, Adam Howard, thank you for being in the Playwright Spotlight.
Thanks for having me.
For the rest of you, until next time, keep writing.